Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to Brain and Behavior. I am Dr. Arpadma from IIT Kanpur. This is week 8 of the course, and now we will talk about the neural correlates of mental state attribution. Now, we are often faced with situations when it becomes difficult to understand others, the feelings and intentions of others as evidenced by their overt behavior. So people might be, behaving in a certain way. They are being very nice to you, but in their head, they probably are very uncomfortable. They don't like hanging out with you. Sometimes people are showing a lot of, pain, disappointment, etc. But inside, they are happy that you have, suffered some misfortune. Sometimes people are just in awkward spots. You are continuously talking about something with the other individual who is not enjoying that conversation at all, but is because of considerations of propriety and nicety, is being forced to go on with the communication. So these kind of things happen quite a lot, where individuals are placed with are faced with these situations. Individuals are faced with these situations when it becomes very difficult to actually correctly understand what the other person is actually feeling, because their outward behavior is not really clearly showing that. It also happens, as I was just saying, that a lot of times there is a mismatch between a person's actual intentions and the displayed behavior. You wanted to say something, but you're behaving in a completely opposite manner. Now, as people, as social animals, we have this ability to gauge the mismatch between people's actual intentions and their outward behavior, and this can be used to recognize people who can or cannot be trusted. You would like to trust the person who, in whose behavior and actions there is the least mismatch, and you will feel very uncomfortable trusting a person whose actual behavior and whatever they are saying are very different from each other. Now, most tasks investigating the brain regions that are involved in making these judgments, in inferring these mental states from these unobservable, non-verbal sort of cues. So most tasks basically are about are used in investigating the developmental milestones of children as they're developing their theory of mind. So most of the theory of mind developmental tasks are used to do these things as well. These paradigms often proceed by asking participants to make inferences about the beliefs, knowledge, intentions, and emotions of others based upon written narratives or pictures. The regions of the brain, however, that are commonly engaged in a variety of tasks wherein the participants are making inferences about the thoughts and beliefs of others include the medial prefrontal cortex, the temporoparietal junction, the superior temporal sulcus, and the temporal lobes. Now, the medial prefrontal cortex. Mitchell and colleagues compared the brain activity of participants engaged in two conditions, forming an impression of another person and a sequencing task. So two conditions are there. One, in one condition you have to form an impression of the other person. You will be given some information, and other will be just a sequencing task. What happened at what point. Now here, participants were asked to view pictures of people, and these pictures were paired with statements about their personality, such as at the party he was the first person to start dancing at the table. A cue indicated how the participants should think about the faces. So this cue would indicate how they should think about these faces and these kind of statements. In the impression formation task, the cue would indicate that the participants make an inference about the personality of this individual in the picture, whereas in the sequencing task, the cue prompted the participants just to remember the order in which specific statements were presented in relation to a particular face. So at the party, he was the first to dance at the table. He went and started dancing on this song. He sat down because he was tired. So there might be three statements, and you have to, in the sequencing task, order them, what happened at what time. And in an impression formation task, you're not really concerned with the sequence of the statement or anything, but just make your own impression of this individual. Both these conditions needed participants to think about other people, but only the impression formation condition required them to think about the internal states of the other people. How is that person a very jolly person? Is that person a very fun loving person or not? Now, the impression formation task engage the medial prefrontal cortex much more than the sequencing task did. Remember, the sequencing task is also the implicating you to think about the other person, but not just estimating their internal states. So, the result of this study suggests that medial prefrontal cortex activation actually plays a very strong role in forming impressions about the internal states of other people, but not in thinking about other types of information regarding another person. So they concluded that social cognition actually, or things of this kind, rely on a distinct set of neural processes. Now, other studies have demonstrated that the relation between the medial prefrontal cortex to figure out this. She also developed a similar method to identify the right temporoparietal region engaged in the theory of mind judgment. So basically, she used the Sally Ann's false belief task. Now, in one of the versions of this task, participants are made to view a series of drawings that depict scenarios involving the characters Sally and Anne. The picture basically pictures begin with Sally placing a marble in a basket and then leaving the room. After Sally is gone, Anne moves the marble from the basket to the drawer. Sally then comes back into the room. Now, the critical question here is, where will Sally look for the marble? In the drawer or in the basket? To be able to answer this question, what basically participants need to do is they need to ignore their own knowledge of the marble being in the drawer, but basically try and estimate that Sally does not know where it is, so she should actually look at the drawer. Okay? Participants who are not able to recognize that Sally does not share their knowledge will basically predict that Sally will look in the drawer. Now, Sax's localizer task also presents a series of false belief stories as well as some other kinds of control scenarios involving falsehoods that have nothing to do with the mental state of other people. So, different other kinds of falsehoods can be created as well in this task. But when brain activity across these different conditions was compared, a region of the right temporoparietal junction was found to be consistently engaged in the theory of mind conditions, where you are basically invoked to estimate the mental states of others. Researchers highlight the exact location of the activity of the right temporoparietal junction for each participant, and then later activity in this region is examined for a differential activity in relation to a series of other tasks that may measure person perception. So the right temporoparietal junction is an important area which is basically involved in person perception or estimating what other persons are feeling. Activity in the right temporoparietal junction has also been associated with reasoning about other people's mental states, but not in a very generic way, not all kinds of decisions, but in very specific situations. Let us look at this in more detail. Now, in a study, participants were presented with three kinds of information about a person: their social background, their mental states, and a life event. For example, the fictional person is somebody named Lisa. I could tell you that Lisa lives in New York City with her parents, so this will be the social background. I could tell you that she wants to move in her own apartment, so you know her intentions, what she's thinking of nowadays. And she then, I could say that she finds out the apartment. She finds out that the apartment is available, which is a life event. So now she knows that the apartment is available, and this is the shifting is going to happen. Now, the study found that the right temporoparietal junction was significantly activated when the participants were presented information about the mental state. So, the fact that she wants to have her own apartment, that is a mental state, but it was not so much activated when they were presented with an information about their social background and life event. So, you can see when mental states are explicitly involved, only then the right temporoparietal junction activation is observed. Now, two hypotheses have been offered to explain the activity in the right temporoparietal junction. One of the hypotheses suggests that right temporoparietal junction is a region that is specialized for reasoning about the mental states of other people, and the medial prefrontal cortex more broadly supports the reasoning about other people and their mental states. Another hypothesis suggests that medial prefrontal cortex supports reasoning about social tasks, and the right temporal parietal junction is important for redirecting attention in both social and non-social tasks. Okay, so there are two possibilities. One is that the RTPJ is a region that is specialized for reasoning about the mental states of other persons, and for other kinds of things, MPFC is recruited. The other hypothesis says that MPFC actually supports reasoning in the social task. What RTBJ does is it allocates your attention to social and non-social aspects of the task. So, in one study, participants' brain activity was measured in relation to processing information about a person's physical appearance. Say, for example, Raj was a very slim boy. Their internal physiology, Sheila was starving because she had skipped breakfast, or their mental state. Say, Ravi knew that his sister's flight has been delayed by 10 hours. So the study found that the medial prefrontal cortex was recruited in relation to information about physical appearance and internal physiology, but the RTPJ was actually recruited for only information about mental states. So these findings actually favor the first hypothesis. In another study, it was reported that the same region of the RTPJ is significantly activated in relation to the false belief localizer task used by Sachs and colleagues, and in relation to the redirecting attention away from non-social cues that signaled invalid information in, let us say, a queuing task like Posner's task. So such a finding suggests that indeed some region of the RTPJ is involved in the control of attention for social and non-social stimuli. So here is, you can say that some evidence is there for the second hypothesis also. On further investigation, Sachs and colleagues found that RTPJ actually has two separate regions. One region is just dedicated to mentalizing, basically estimating the other people's mental states, and the other region is actually dedicated to reorienting attention. So what we can say is that RTPJ is actually doing both the things. Let's talk about the superior temporal sulcus. In several situations, we need to pay attention to non-verbal cues rather than verbal cues about individuals to be able to understand and or estimate their mental states. Moreover, patients with language comprehension deficits are better at detecting when someone is lying than are individuals without language deficits and control participants. So, in some sense, when when you're sort of unburdened with the whole gamut of activities involved with language comprehension, then maybe you start paying more attention to the non-verbal cues, and hence these people with language deficits are probably better at telling whether somebody is lying or not by talking to them or understanding what they're saying, but just by observing their non-verbal behavior. And these non-verbal behavior basically include cues such as body language, posture, facial expression, eye gaze, and so on. Now, regions in the fusiform area and the amygdala has been found to use facial expressions to make social judgments. In the first, and there is some developmental evidence for this as well. Say, for example, in the first year of life itself, children develop a joint attention, the ability of joint attention, that is the ability to monitor another person's attention. One of the ways children do it is by noting the direction of the other person's gaze, something that is unique to humans. Because we have this extra white region in our eye, when our black region is looking at someplace else, it is easily distinguishable and we can sort of know where the person is looking at actually. So Thomas Hiller and colleagues in 2007 suggested that eyes have developed a sort of a new social function in the course of human evolution by being able to support cooperative social interactions. Moreover, eye gaze is also found useful for understanding when other person's words are not matching with their mental state. So, for example, if somebody is telling you sorry and their eyes are not really communicating the same message, you sort of know that the sorry is a very insincere sorry, and you sort of get that. Investigating on the same lines, David Perret discovered that the cells in the superior temporal sulcus, or the monkeys, are actually helpful in identifying head position and gaze direction. Some cells in the superior temporal sulcus are known to respond to head direction, while some other cells are known to respond to gaze direction. So the superior temporal sulcus can handle both of these tasks. Now, the ability to distinguish head position from eye gaze allows the possibility of using these cues to make inference about other people's mental states. For instance, individuals who turn their head in the same direction as their gaze may be thinking about different things, as opposed to individuals who are basically oriented their head in a direction different to their gaze. Now, more evidence has surfaced that the superior temporal sulcus is actually important for interpreting eye gaze in relation to mental states. Basically, comes from neuroimaging studies. For instance, Pelfrey and colleagues examined whether activity in the superior temporal sulcus depended upon the mental states indicated by the shifts of eye gaze in another person. So they actually said that STS is really important here. So what happened in their study, participants were made to watch an animated woman who directed her attention either towards or away from a checkerboard that appeared and flickered in her right or left visual field. Randomly, the figure took either 1 second or 3 seconds to shift her gaze. So sometimes the person will just immediately look at the checkerboard after 1 second. Sometimes the person will take almost 3 seconds to shift her gaze to the checkerboard. Now, if the supinate circus is actually involved solely in tracking shifts in eye gaze, then it would be activated to the same degree in relation to any kinds of shift in eye gaze. If, on the other hand, the supinate circus is involved in integrating shifts in eye gaze with mental states, then the activation of the supinate circus should be related to where the character directs her attention, because eye gaze shifted towards the checkerboard and eye gaze shifted away from the checkerboard would then basically indicate two different mental states. I'm thinking this, so I'm looking away from the checkerboard, I'm thinking that, so I'm looking towards the checkerboard. Now, consistent with the latter predictions, activity in posterior region of the supinate circus varied in relation to shifts of eye gaze direction. Gaze shifts to empty space evoked a longer activation of the STS because in some sense the system was recalibrating to when the eye gaze shifted to the checkerboard. Let's look at this in more detail. Now, researchers concluded that when the figure unexpectedly did not look at the target and shifted its gaze to the empty space, observers definitely would have been flummoxed and they will have had to reformulate their expectation. And because this process took longer, the activity in STS also sort of prolonged. Also, these people found that the superior temporal circus activation was also linked to the timing of the gaze. That is, gaze shifts occurring at 1 second after the checkerboard appeared. The context of the gaze shift was seen. So that okay, then my attention is shifted here. The checkerboard has appeared here, and that's why I'm looking there. But if it happened 3 years after the checkerboard, 3 seconds, 3 seconds after the checkerboard appeared, the context effect was not seen. So then participants did not think of this as a single episode, but thought that maybe the eyes are going there randomly. So the researchers proposed that when the time between the presentation of the checkerboard and the gaze shift was too long, the gaze shift was more ambiguous and the observers did not necessarily link the appearance of the checkerboard and the shift of the gaze to that exact location. So if you look at this entire thing, finally a similar region in the STS was more strongly found to be activated when a virtual reality character made eye contact with the participant versus when the character averted his gaze from the participant. So you can see that the superior temporal circus has been shown to be involved in orienting eyes to different regions in space and say for example correlating the change in mental states with the shifts in eye gaze. So the STS seems to signal the focus of attention of other individuals as well as to provide important social signals. Say for example, like the individual may be trying to orient our attention from a novel object or maybe wishing to engage in a social interaction. Sometimes people are sort of looking at you and you kind of go and ask them, okay, do you want to say something to me? That kind of thing. These studies also demonstrate that activity in visual processing regions is sensitive to the context of the observed action. It kind of takes into account why that kind of action is happening, why attention is shifted from this place to that place, and so on. I think I will stop here and we'll talk more about social cognition in the next lecture.